should go to Manoji, for next talk. Manoji, actually, over to you.
Thank you, Alex. Thanks, Alex, for the invite. Am I audible? Yeah. It's always a pleasure to be part of the GCTH initiatives. This is my presentation is on political dissent in India. This has been our project with Jamia and Japan and South Korea. So in this presentation, I'll be focusing more on like the recent student protest in India and how to kind of characterize the political dissent and the characteristics of the political dissent, or to sort of analyze it in a different perspective. What is the core of the issue? In this discussion, my focus is on the storming student protests India has witnessed of late and the political nature of the student dissent across the country. One of the most important characteristics of these uprisings is that it surpassed the barriers of traditional political organizations, as they were more of amorphous collectives, and it also raised the question of gender, caste, and the status of religious minority. The Indian left was heavily criticized for not addressing the question of caste and religion in the Indian context, though gender can be an exception in the list, while it is also contestable. Major student movements of late were construed on the issue of caste and the Hindutva project of demonizing the Muslims. All of the student protests cannot be claimed to have a democratic and essential character politically. Well, the case in point would be anti-Mandal agitation led by the upper caste student in the early 90s. Mandal Commission was the commission which was elected, which allotted 27% reservation to the other backward communities in India. In protest to it, the upper caste students came to the street and protested against it. After the Mandal Commission protest, the issue of caste was brought to the fore in the context of a suicide of the Dalit scholar and activist, Ravita Bamula, on January 17, 2016. He was studying at University of Hyderabad. Ironically, Bamula's suicide note became his first and last writing, who aspired to be a writer of science. And I'm quoting him, and this is his suicide note. I loved science, stars, nature, but then I loved people without knowing that people have long since divorced from nature. Our feelings are second-handed. Our love is constructed. Our beliefs colored. Our originality valid through artificial art. It has become truly difficult to love without getting hurt. The value of a man was reduced to his immediate identity and nearest possibility, to a vote, to a number, to a thing. Never was a man treated as a mind, as a glorious thing made up of stardust, in every field, in studies, in street, in politics, in dying and living. I am writing this kind of letter for the first time. This is suicide note. My first time of a final letter. All the while, some people, for them, life itself is curse. My birth is my fatal accident. I don't believe in after-death stories, ghosts, or spirits. If there is anything at all I believe that I can travel to the stars and know about the other world. Ravita Bamula was a Dalit scholar who was studying at the University of Hyderabad, and he was expelled from the university with other 5 Dalit scholars, and they were, because of the institutional harassment among the 5 people those who were protesting, Ravita Bamula finally committed suicide. The massive student agitation followed by the institutional murder of Ravita Bamula spreaded across the country and across the world and became an instance of widespread Dalit mobilization. Dalit is a lower caste in the Indian context, and an instance of higher education becoming the site of anti-caste struggles. This is not to exclude certain vernacular and local student protests mobilized around the issue of caste, but to specifically mention the vast reach and its importance in churning the existing political framework by experimenting various political permutations and reconfiguration. This extended to the further student protests at JNU and other campuses. The student protests that started off from the campus of Jamia Millia Islamia in 2019 against the CANRC eventually expanded across the country, and it was also against the Hindu nationalist government's attempt to subject Indian citizens to a count that result in the ostensible exclusion of the Muslims. This was exclusionary, breaching the principles of Gandhian notion of nation and Ambedkar notion of constitutional democracy and democratic nationalism. One of the important unique features of this protest was that it was led by female students. After Jamia, there was another protest site which kind of continued as an extension of Jamia. So that was Shaheen Bagh. Shaheen Bagh can also be considered as an immediate response to the crackdown of the student protest, but the problematic interaction with the history of exclusionary politics played by the Hindutva state machine and the constant vilification of Muslims in India constituted the virtual plane of the event. The occupation of Shaheen Bagh is also situated in the larger problematic of creating territories in political terms and transforming it. So in this context, all these protests incites a response to the constitution of Hindutva heterotopia, which employs exclusionary spatial strategies that segregates groups that do not fit Hindutva's template of an ideal citizen of the Hindu nation. Another important characteristic of the new student movement is the notion of caste and the functioning of Hindutva right-wing movement in India, which is based on sectarian politics, which excludes the Muslims and upholding the hierarchical caste structure embedded in their philosophical outlook. Hindutva is a potent political project, actively engaging in the relation between the abstract space and the concrete territory fundamental to the nation, through certain social practices, appropriating, deploying, and controlling the exercise of power. Ram Rajya, which is a concept of the nation, Hindutva are potent examples of such kind of a heterotropic construction, which consciously engages with the spatial strategies of political exclusion and hatred. These student protests offer a strong response to the virtual problem embedded in the very notion of Indian nationness and offer a counter strategy to encounter this. In this protest assemblage, the components of Gandhi and Ambedkar emerges as Indian senders, which is always subtracted or evaded from the apparatus of capture employed by the state and the Hindutva machine. In this act of political dissensus, especially after the institutional murder of Ravita Bamula, the Dalit scholar at University of Hyderabad, along with the assertion of Dalit affirmative politics, there occurred a political experiment of various combinations. Muslim-Dalit unity, and then the resultant dialogue between the left and the Ambedkarite student organizations, more focusing on the caste issues. So the usage of Lal Salam and Neel Salam. Lal Salam, Lal is red and Salam is salute, red salute, and Neel Salam is blue salute. Blue is the color of the Dalit organizations. And Jai Bhim and Lal Salam were resonated across. Jai Bhim is Dr. B.R. Ambedkar Bhim, and Lal Salam is red salute. So this clubbing of the caste and the communist politics were resonated across various protest sites, and it was claimed that this addresses the huge cleft that has been created between the left, the liberal, and the emerging Dalit politics. But this new political resolution was fraught with many deeper issues to the core. The new combination in the campus became a failure as these Ambedkarite organizations, student organizations, eventually contested the elections separately. This has weakened the resistant movement against the fundamentalist politics of Hindutva, but also unraveled the fundamental issues at stake with this new political permutations between the left and caste politics. The major criticism was against the left's reductive class politics, which couldn't address the dimension of caste in the larger issue of class exploitation. This rift was not something new, but was very much there in Ambedkar's sharp criticism of the class politics of the broader left, which leave the question of social stratification and social order untouched, while focusing more on economic reformation and revolution. Ambedkar, in his inimitable style, critiqued the Marxist slogan, "You have nothing to lose but your chains," as it completely evades the ways in which social and religious rights are distributed among the different castes. And I quote Ambedkar, "The question for him is whether he minds one class ill-treating and suppressing other class as a matter of a system, as a matter of principle, and thus allow tyranny and oppression to continue to divide one class from other." Ambedkar was also accused of being opportunist and imperialist Jewish by the left for his sharp criticism of the Marxist emphasis on economic reform without adequately considering the question of social stratification even within the rank of workers. Given the specific problematic of the Indian context, the protest, how to address the question of dissential politics as it centers around the question of caste, religion, gender identity, and all. The new diffuse guerrilla warfare model focused on the imperceptibility and anonymity of techno-anarchism won't be of much help in the Indian context, as the question of caste is what makes the minority subjects of Dalits and Muslims invisible. Not to mention the counter-publics created by the digital Dalits in the virtual sphere poses a strong challenge to the mainstream media practices contained by the media market logic. In this context, what I want to pose is what is meant by a revolutionary subjectivity. The move to go beyond the confines of hierarchical political organization structure to form a multitude in the sense of hard and agree can be identified also as one of the main characteristics of the new student movement across India. So I'm just going to this is the problematic that I want to raise as far as political dissent in India is concerned. Like if caste becomes one of the most important issue, surfacing and resurfacing in various student movements and also religious issues or the minority status. What is it to kind of conceive a revolutionary subject, or what does it mean by a political dissent? So I would like to talk about Badiou first. Badiou and the political becoming, subject as the site of truth. Badiou's theory of multiplicity comes to rescue, as his mathematical ontology refutes the possibility of the one in thinking of multiples as multiples. This theory brings in a typology of situations and offers a philosophical system which discerns the structure of disparate situations in which the subject appears. The subject in Badiou is not a Cartesian subject, but it is one subjectivized by the event in its fidelity to a new development. It is a becoming subject of the individual qua the event or the evental subject. The subject in question is connected to the event in terms of a generic truth, procedures of which are undertaken in 4 major areas: love, science, art, and politics. Amongst these, the generic procedures propose politics anticipate a collective subject, unlike the individual subjects and mixed subjects in other cases. Thus, apart from the discerning of the structure, generic procedures also shed lights on events, truths, and subjects. To quote Badiou, to exist as a multiple is always belonging to a multiplicity. To exist is to be an element of. There is no other possible predication of existence as such. The immediate consequence is that to exist is to be in a situation. So it is clear here, nothing can really surpass the count or being in a situation. The idea of the minimal founding of set of a situation or the multiple as one will always border on the edge of void, which slips the consistent into inconsistent multiplicity. Thus, the void or the empty set is always barred from being present, though it nonetheless marks its presence in all the regimes of presentation and leaves a trace which is unintelligible to the order of situation. It is a signification of the existence of the unpresentable and thus an existential claim. An ontology accounts for this sort of exclusion, governed by the metastructure pertaining to the multiplicity. In Badiouian parlance, reality is critically interrogated in terms of the transfinite set theory, laying out a mathematical foundation to ontology, which is the multiple of multiples or infinite multiples. Any given situation is a particular ordering of this inconsistent multiplicity into a consistent multiple as one. In general, a set is defined as a collection of elements ordered in terms of a relation of belonging and inclusion. For Badiou, every element of a set is itself a set. This accomplishes the idea that every multiple is a multiple of multiples with no reference to units of any kind. Ontology is no more associated with the essence of the element, but its relation is one of belonging with a particular set. The events were mediated by the subject in its fidelity to the truth of the event. The notion of belonging and inclusion in terms of presentation is central in defining the excess which leads to the constitution of event. Certain subsets may not be presented, but can be possibly represented because of the specific count that the metastructure imposes on it. This excess remains indecipherable and different from the initial count, which challenges the normative logic of constitution enunciated by the traditional theories. An evental site is different from a singular multiple in terms of how it is connected to the event. In the typology of the situation as laid out by Badiou, the singular multiple, which is present but not represented, informs the danger of inconsistency and opens up a crack heralding the possibility of a new order. The proletariat in Marxist parlance could be considered as a singular multiplicity, but this excess or surplus, which is unrepresented, does not really lead us to an event, and hence Badiou introduces the concept of an evental site, which he calls an abnormal multiple. I will term the evental site an entirely abnormal multiple. This is to quote Badiou. I will term the evental site an entirely abnormal multiple, that is a multiple such that none of its elements are presented in the situation. The site itself is presented, but beneath it, nothing from which it is composed is present. As such, the site is not part of the situation. I will say of such a multiple that it is on the edge of the void or foundation, unquote. The evental site, though, is present as a set, but none of its elements are presented as such and is not part of the order. This marks the difference between singular multiplicity and the evental site. The evental site is at once totally singular and anonymous and constitutes a fundamental mathematical strength of an event. The evental site is not a pure multiple, but borders on the edge of the void, leaving behind a trace of appearance, provoking a new thought vis-a-vis being qua being. This is possible through a specific transgressive self-referential multiple that belongs to the evental site, the appearance of which is a vanishing itself. Even though Badiou talks about this subject the subject as the site of truth and the evental site moving away from the singular multiplicity, I would like to focus more on Guattarian analysis of schizoanalytic cartography as a model to exemplify the political becomings, especially to kind of introduce the problem, to explore the problem of caste being was one of the major source of major contestation in most of the political uprisings. Schizoanalytic cartography can be considered as a pedagogic intervention in tackling the innovative forms of experience, collective expressions, and disparate practices against the normative formal diagrams or modeling of capitalism and psychoanalysis. The fourfold functors of schizoanalytic ecology, universe of reference, existential territory, psychoanalytic flows, and the machinic phylum, opens up the chaotic void and the schizo possibility, rather than confining the new field of relations and experience to already existing traditional and normative diagrams. The fourfold functors which constitute the schizoanalytic ecology cannot be limited to the domain of the given, as it focuses on the domain of giving, which promotes a concatenation of affects, of sense, and pragmatic effects. Guattari conceives the complex conceptual fourfold typology as a meta-model which can address the modes of subjectivity that cannot be grasped in the contours of traditional subject-object divide and in the modes of linguistic articulation or neurosis. Rather, it is an instrument of deciphering modeling systems in diverse domains, and thus a matter of constituting networks and rhizomes in order to escape the system of modelization in which we are entangled. I would like to more focus on one aspect of the whole of my presentation. I am not giving all the sub themes of my presentation, but to focus on caste as abstract machine. The question that remains to be asked now, like in terms of an abstract machine, whether there is an Indian diagram or an abstract machine, the answer is definitely yes. There are a prolific number of such diagrams present in the Indian milieu as typical of any ancient civilization. But if there is a master diagram that has shown terrible durability and tenacious conservatism in India, it is a caste diagram. Dumont's classic study of the Indian caste system, Homo hierarchicus, has brought out the profound nuances involved in this diagram and the various forms of assemblages it has given rise to. The structural method through which he unnotes its metaphysical intricacies and social complexities is a variant of Levi-Straussian structuralism modified by the concept of value, hierarchy, and encompassment. Diagrams also get mutated and deterritorialized. One of the most original aspects of diagram is its being a place of mutations. The Dumontian study of caste analysis analyzes it as a whole composed of hierarchical and encompassing caste strata, whose underlying thread is purity, pollution, opposition. The Brahmin and the untouchable are the polar limits of the whole, with other intermediary castes placed in between. According to the purity pollution principle, Brahmin is the purest and the untouchable is the most defiled, between whom no transaction nor communication is warranted. One of my teacher and other philosopher, whose name is Sundar Sarukaya, approaches this problem differently from an established sociological anthropological analysis, giving a philosophical twist to the stratification thesis. In his paper, The Phenomenology of Untouchability, he argues that the untouchability maintained toward the lower caste is only a mutation that occurred to an original Brahmin diagram. The original untouchable was a Brahmin himself. The untouchability organized the interior scape of the Brahmin caste, which was paradigmatic of the general model that emerged later. Within the Brahmin caste, untouchability was a positive value and a sacred principle. Accordingly, the purest and highest in the hierarchy, the Acharya was the most untouchable, and the other inferior ranks were ordered according to their degree of purity. Later, this diagram got deterritorialized from the Brahmin's caste and duly reterritorialized on the untouchables. Sarukaya argues that through this movement, the untouchable lower caste was made a Derridian supplement to the Brahmins. To draw a modern metaphor, the whole movement was an outsourcing of an impurity by Brahmins to the untouchables. The caste diagram, which has been central to Indian ethos all through history, has exercised a pervasive influence. Almost everything in the purview of human life, like flora, fauna, metals, precious stones, food, daily working hours, crafts, body, colors, geographical regions, directions, rivers, celestial bodies, medicinal herbs, and so on, are hierarchically graded in terms of purity and pollution central to the caste system. But with modernity, many mutations and reterritorializations have also occurred. Colonialism and modernity have become two powerful influences or two diagrams that have made serious mutations to this master diagram. Though they have brought in new technologies, new politics, and new worldviews, the caste diagram has proven flexible enough to modify itself and successfully reterritorialize upon them. Or as facts stand, one could argue that caste diagram is the dominant mode which was successfully mutated the Western dispensations within its own territory. So, if you are analyzing this new protest movements without this caste as an abstract machine, that is my point. What I would like to argue. Caste is an abstract machine. is something which has to be considered in explaining the political dimensions of the protest. Even whether it is a Mandal Commission protest, or it is Ravita Bamula suicide, or whether it is Shaheen Bagh or Jamia protest, all of these are centered around the larger politics of Hindutva, which is based on the philosophy of caste, which is based on the philosophy of the hierarchical thing, and also on the eulogizing of the Hindutva, which ostensibly excludes Muslims. That's all. Thanks.
Great. Thank you very much. I think actually our talk is a little bit, converged into one point, singular multiplicity, and how do we understand, politics, and then kind of agency, by which we can, to bring in the new world, the abstract machine, and then fiction. All right.